there is a Civil Rights Act that protects individuals from being discriminated. And it's the Catch-All Discrimination Act, right? Where you can't discriminate from an employer's perspective based on their race, color, religion, and sex. And sex has been a very hot topic in the past couple decades about what does that truly mean. And over the years, they have finally understood the meaning behind sex and elaborated it a little bit more than just the male and female. And you said to mention recently, right, June 20th, literally a little over a week ago, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of protection in the workplace for gays and transgender people. So there is a federal civil rights law that prohibits employers from discriminating against workers based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. This is huge, right? This is huge for a Supreme Court to pass because it's not aligned with the 2019 Pentagon's transgender policy for military. But you gave me a little bit more insight on that policy that people can still enlist with a diagnosis. But like you said, they have to be in their biological sex for at least 36 months before enlisting. If they've pursued any transition that is done medically, they are presumptively disqualified. That's prior to enlisting. So medical transition has to happen after the military, after they enlist, if they qualify for what you qualify for the 2016 policy, right?
Yes.
There's a bunch of different references and guidance that I will link later on at the end of the video for people to research and look up those resources. But one thing that you did mention is that I mentioned that I found out through research is in May, right? In May, a transgender Navy officer, and I forgot the year of this, was the first service member to receive the waiver. I'm assuming it's this year. Navy officer, first service member to receive a waiver to serve in their preferred gender since the policy was put in place.
Yes, that was very recent. That was a huge win for everybody.
One thing that we want to emphasize to anybody watching, because I'm sure the training that we received through the military about LGBT, they don't really go in depth about transitioning. So what is your insight that you want to elaborate on how people can transition in the military?
You said I'm under the 2016 standards. I was lucky enough to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria before the policy was put in place. So these guidelines will apply to anyone in my situation where they were diagnosed before 12 April 2019, or anybody who is fortunate enough to get that waiver to the current transgender ban, which was 12 April, anyone who enlisted or received a diagnosis after. And it is done by a case-by-case basis. So one thing I want to emphasize to everybody, that being transgender is in itself is not disqualifying. It is receiving the diagnoses and pursuing the medical transition. You can serve openly as transgender, and according to the current guidelines within the Air Force, at least, people must respect your preferred pronouns. So there's actually two kind of categories of transitioning. There is the social transitioning, which includes changing your name, changing your pronoun, dressing as you would prefer to dress, appearing as your preferred gender within society. And there is a medical transition. And the way it works in the Air Force currently, if you were lucky enough to receive that waiver, be under those guidelines, the first thing you need to do is go to mental health and receive that diagnosis for gender dysphoria. From there, you will be referred to the MMDT THMEU, that stands for the Medical Multidisciplinary Team, Transgender Health Medical Evaluation Unit. They are a team of doctors, lawyers, uh, therapists, endocrinologists stationed at Wilford Hall in Lackland Air Force Base. What you do is you TDY there for about a week, and there you will form a medical treatment plan, which includes the time where you do want to start presenting as your preferred gender, any kind of hormones or surgery that you want to receive, and when you'll receive EPPs to wear the correct uniform and to use the correct facilities. Um, After the TDY, you return home, and you actually do need to work with your chain of command. This needs to be approved by your commander, and it needs to be approved, I think, by your local MTF, just to make sure they do have the capabilities. And that was a problem that actually I had. They didn't have the capabilities to give me my hormones. So I actually telehealth with one of the doctors at the MMDP to receive my testosterone. After that MTP, the treatment plan is approved by your commands. That will set a timeline in place when you do receive the ECPs, when you start, in the case of transgender women, when they'll start going according to the female PT standards. Essentially, when you're able to reflect in DEERS as your preferred gender. So when everything is done, in my case, it's 3 years, just because the surgeries that I chose to receive, my timeline's a little bit longer. Usually it's about a year for this whole process to complete if someone's lucky. But after that gender flip, you will be officially your preferred gender in DEERS. In the case of transgender males, you will start taking the male test. So right now, I'm taking the female test on testosterone, which is good and bad. And something I want to emphasize about transitioning in general, transitioning is a huge choice. You do not need to transition to be transgender, which I think is one of the downsides to being transgender in the military. You kind of do need to go through this process. However, when you are formulating the treatment plan, you are getting to choose what you want to do to your body, because not all of it, but a lot of it is irreversible. And not everybody wants to transition. When you transition, let me know if this is getting a little bit too much. You do lose the ability to reproduce unless you take steps beforehand, or if you stop going on hormones, you go off hormones for a year, which can be traumatizing in itself. So even if someone just wants to change their name or go by a certain pronoun, that doesn't mean that they're not transgender. It just means that they don't want to have these incredibly invasive procedures done on their body. So I know that was a little bit complicated. Do you have any questions about that process?
Right. So it's good that you cleared it up, that there's 2 different types of categories of transitioning. Right. Now, it seems like the medical side of the house has some side effects or potential side effects if you start and stop in between, right? If you don't follow through all the way through the end, it may have an effect on your body. Now, say you don't want to go through all that medical procedure and you're fine with just the identity or having that free will of being called the gendered preferred pronoun. How would you go about that business?
For me, when I first came out, I went to my MTL, who at the time was my supervisor, and I was okay with him telling everybody, hey, I'm male, please address me by sir, he, him. There are several people who I know would be uncomfortable with doing that, especially I met a girl who was in maintenance, and she was afraid of coming out to her shop because of just the environment that it created, the different microcultures within the Air Force. So the only person that she told was her first sergeant. So she was able to go on that TDY to receive the treatment plan. So it really is kind of a case by case preference. You could tell the people you immediately work with, you could tell your first sergeant, or you can just be socially transitioned out when you're just off duty in your cities just with your friends. I know for me, I make an effort to let the people I immediately work with know that, hey, I'm male, please call me him. But when I'm off at the BX, getting a sandwich for lunch, I won't correct the workers because it's just too much stress. Um, so there's several different avenues, and definitely it is a personal choice. And again, what I want to emphasize, if you do know that someone is transgender and they told you and they asked you to address them by their preferred pronouns, they might not be 100% open. They might not want everybody to know. So definitely when you're in public around other people, ask them if it's okay if I address you by your preferred pronoun.
I don't know how difficult you had it here at Goodfellow while you were a student. You know, the one misconception that a lot of people had when they found out you as a student identified yourself as a male pronoun, right? Masculine pronouns, that why it was so difficult for them either to use masculine pronouns as you wanted, right? As you asked for, or just to call you by rank and name, you know, and
Right.
We are engraved in this military mindset that we address each other as either sir, ma'am, or rank and name, right? That is what you learn in basic training. If you have problems with pronouns, you should still be addressing each other by rank and name, as we learned in basic training and in tech school and in our operational units, right? So is there any relief or some peace of mind for individuals that are constantly battling with the people around them, right? Their peers, their superiors, or their juniors, asking them to address them with the appropriate pronoun, but cannot? Is there documentation that can be signed by the commander enforcing that?
Not that I am aware of, unfortunately. It is really not part of the ECP process that has only to do with facilities and with dress and appearance. The current guideline is you don't need any kind of paperwork to be addressed by your proper pronoun. However, I see it less of a military issue, and I think it's more of a society issue. Just growing up in the Western culture, the United States, it's definitely a binary as far as gender is for the most part. Our brains are programmed growing up as male or female. They see certain characteristics, they hear my voice, they see the way my body is shaped, and their mind subconsciously assumes female. And I've had several conversations with people, and it definitely, a lot of times they are aware that I am male. However, it is an automatic response that someone has to constantly work on. Even when I came out, it was a problem for my family, and it's gotten better. But initially, it was calling me by my preferred name, calling me by preferred pronoun. It was hard to break that muscle memory. So the biggest thing I could just say, yes, call people by their rank and name if you're having problems with it, or just repetition. Even I don't mind for the most part if it's a mistake. I've only really run into it once where it was a little bit malicious, but it ended up being a lack of education. They had never met someone who's transgender. Definitely, it's correcting yourself immediately. I know I appreciate it. If someone's open about it and you hear someone else being referred to as the improper pronoun, correct them. I've heard, my friend actually told me that happened in her shop when I wasn't there. Her friend, who I barely know, corrected someone on my pronouns, which was awesome. But unfortunately, there is no kind of paperwork enforcement. It comes down to a respect thing.
This is very informative and eye-opening. Even in doing some research and reading some articles, you don't get the first-person perspective. And so now I'm being able to see some of the trends, some of the struggles that you have dealt with, the benefit of allies, and so forth. And it's very unfortunate. And even if the military were to make that change, it takes a world, or it takes a country to continue to develop that culture, policies, laws, and so forth as well.
Right, right. I definitely think that is because, as we discussed, there is a very, very small amount of people who actually identify as LGBT. There's probably an even smaller amount of people who are comfortable enough to be open and to advocate the importance of ally. I can't stress the importance of allies more. Just having those people who are willing to fight on our behalf if someone's not comfortable enough, if they're too shy to start the conversations, we absolutely need that.